وهي مخصصة للدورة الثانية لترامب وتبعاتها على فلسطين. إذن من السمات الأساسية لإدارة ترامب الأولى كانت
In several Arab states and Israel, these agreements directly contributed to Al-Aqsa flood. Indeed, one of the justifications made by Hamas for this operation was the threat of Palestine disappearance implied by the so-called deal of the century. It was also plausible that these accords facilitated massacre and repression over the past 15 months, given how the solidarity forged under these agreements enabled military support for Israel, as we have seen when countries such as Saudi Arabia intercepted missiles launched from Iran and Yemen. This support, at least indirectly, allowed Israel to perpetrate its genocide. Then, what should we expect by Trump's second term at the White House? It is particularly important to raise this question, especially after October 7th, which have significantly reshaped various dynamics, including on the domestic scene in the US. Before giving the floor to our fourth speaker, we might underline the last ceasefire agreement, which enabled us to raise several hypotheses. Many commentators have argued that Trump played a crucial role in securing this agreement by forcing Netanyahu to sign it. Much attention has been given to Steve Witkoff, who reportedly forced Netanyahu's hand by insisting on a meeting even during the Shabbat. Nevertheless, it seems difficult at this stage to read this policy and to measure the significance of this disagreement and conflict. We have already noticed Witkoff's change of tone. Then the key question here is not whether Trump truly threatened Netanyahu, but why Trump insisted so long and so strongly on securing a ceasefire before officially assuming office. The first hypothesis links this insistence to the Abraham Accords. Pushing for a ceasefire before assuming office could be a way to reset these agreements. Trump seems already eager to frame the ceasefire as a first step towards peace in the region. Another point is that Trump wanted to claim his control over Netanyahu, reversing the perception of the past 15 months where US diplomatic effort to enforce a ceasefire failed, and Israel always appeared to have the final say. Finally, Trump's pressure during the transition state may serve as a strategy to balance its future unconditional and unprecedented support for Israel, including Netanyahu's offensive in the West Bank. Now I will turn to our four speakers who will explore possible future scenario. First, we will have Tamara Kharroub, who will precisely give us an analysis of the Trump new administration impact on the ceasefire. Then we will have Yousef Munayyer, who will also in English will focus on the internal dynamic in the US, which have been profoundly affected by the event of October 7. Then we will have Osama Abu Irshaid, who will outline the contour of the new Trump administration, analyzing its team composition, his discourses on Gaza before and after he got elected, and his plans for restructuring the Middle East. And finally, Tariq will revisit the Abraham Accords and analyze how these agreements are facing huge challenges after Al-Aqsa flood. So I'll now give the floor to Tamara. Tamara is the Deputy Executive Director and Senior Fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. She holds a PhD from Indiana University and a master's degree from the University of Westminster. Her research focuses on the intersection of technology, human rights, and democracy in the Middle East and North Africa. She publishes research and policy analysis papers exploring the role of media and communication technology in the political process, including issues of digital authoritarianism, surveillance technology, identity politics online, artificial intelligence, digital rights, in addition to her research on Palestine and Israel. The floor is yours, Tamara.
Thank you, Leila. Can you hear me? I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Leila. I'm glad to be here. In my remarks, I will offer some observations and assessment of the Trump administration's second term, focusing on three primary domains: the ceasefire deal and situation in Gaza, the status of the West Bank and the illegal Israeli settlements, and finally, the Trump effect on the global order and international law, especially with regard to the question of Palestine. Altogether, I will argue that the Trump administration this time around appears to be ready to enable Israeli takeover of the entire Palestinian territory in full contravention of international law and norms. First, the ceasefire deal in Gaza, and I will try to answer some of the questions that Leila raised. The Trump factor in pushing for the ceasefire and the captive exchange agreement has been widely celebrated, especially that it was largely Biden's proposal from May 2024 that it was agreed to. There is no question that while Biden was unwilling and unable to pressure Netanyahu to accept the deal, Trump did make it happen. But we have to address some important questions here. What is the price of this agreement? How did Trump do it? And more importantly, why did Trump do it? And part of the story here, in my assessment, is Trump's persona and unpredictability. He made vague threats on social media that I'm sure you're all familiar with. He didn't even have to explain what he meant. All hell will break. It seems nobody wanted to risk finding out what he meant. And here I think the madman theory can help us understand Trump's leverage. It's the advantage of unpredictability as a strategy for success, in bargaining especially. The madman theory posits that a leader who is perceived to behave irrationally and erratically has a better chance of persuading global actors and exacting concessions. This seems to have worked for Trump, even though it did not work for Nixon, who coined the term. And the reason it worked for Trump is because Trump has shown that he is, in fact, mad. And his madness is not just a threat, but a reality. Trump's unpredictability or madness is his strongest asset and his leverage, because most global actors are not willing to risk testing Trump or upsetting him at the beginning of a 4-year term. But Trump's madness is also dangerous, especially when combined with his extremist pro-Israel views and the circles around him. Trump very likely, as some analysts have presented, made promises to Netanyahu in order for pushing him to accept the deal and to allow Netanyahu to appease the far right in his coalition. Promises related to West Bank annexation, maximum pressure on Iran, further weakening and isolating it, and related to normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But why was Trump keen on pushing for the ceasefire before he took office? Clearly, this serves Trump's own political agenda. He wants to be seen as a deal maker and, believe it or not, as a peacemaker. He considers this as a PR opportunity. He dominated the headlines as the one who achieved the deal that Biden failed at. But more importantly, Trump has made it very, very clear that Saudi normalization with Israel is a top priority for him. He considers the Abraham Accords as his most significant foreign policy legacy, and extending them or expanding them is his current top foreign policy priority. And he thinks this will get him the Nobel Peace Prize. Trump would not be able to even begin pursuing normalization with Saudi Arabia while Israel was still bombing Gaza. So while Trump may have pushed for the ceasefire, he himself is not interested in the details or in what happens next with regard to the agreement. He expressed no faith that it will hold and distanced himself from the whole thing. Also recently, he just lifted Biden's hold on 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, because nothing says ceasefire and peace like 2,000-pound bombs. What's more alarming is the news this morning. He's been talking about Gaza as a luxury real estate project. is now pushing both Egypt and Jordan to take millions of Palestinians, and I quote here, just clean out Gaza. And earlier, Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy to the Middle East, had suggested moving Palestinians from Gaza to Indonesia. So to sum up my first point here, when it comes to Israel, Trump's madness is not unpredictable. In fact, it is very predictable and should be taken very seriously. It is in line with what the Israeli far right, with what Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been saying about Gaza. The price of this ceasefire deal may very well be the forced displacement and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. And this brings me to my second point, the threat of West Bank annexation. Trump is known as one of the most pro-Israel US presidents. And it seems he's on the path of implementing Netanyahu's plan to annex the entire territory of Palestine. Regarding the West Bank, if we look at the team that Trump assembled around him for key foreign policy and Middle East policy positions, his picks include largely war hawks who are staunchly pro-Israel and particularly anti-Palestinian. They strongly back Israeli annexation of the West Bank, in addition to pushing for war with Iran. I'll go through some examples here. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is a known supporter of Israel. He advocated for the full-scale Israeli assault on Gaza. He previously introduced bills to block US aid to the Palestinians and criticized international efforts to pressure Israel on the settlements. Mike Huckabee, he's nominated as US ambassador to Israel. He's an evangelical hardliner who said there is no such thing as a Palestinian, no such thing as occupation, no such thing as the West Bank, and no such thing as settlements. He said that the West Bank, which he calls Judea and Samaria, is an integral part of Israel. He recently made statements that there is a very high chance that under the Trump second administration, the US will give Israel a green light to annex the West Bank. Even Steve Witkoff, who helped broker this deal, is a Zionist supporter of Israel and specifically of Netanyahu. He was moved by Netanyahu's speech at US Congress last July and said it was a privilege and a spiritual experience to be there. Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, is also an evangelical Zionist, and he has been calling for building the third Jewish temple on the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Elise Stefanik, nominated as US ambassador to the UN, has been a fierce and vocal advocate for Israel, most notably in taking measures to combat Palestine activism and anti-war protests on college campuses. She recently backed Israel's biblical right to the West Bank at her confirmation hearing in US Congress. Interestingly, she is a favorite of Miriam Adelson. Miriam Adelson is a Republican mega donor to the Republican Party. She previously, with her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, she donated $100 million to Trump's campaign this time around, and her number one issue is West Bank annexation. According to Trump, she and her late husband were behind Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital during his first presidency. And clearly, they were also mega donors to his campaign. I won't go through the full list, but I think you get the idea. The list goes on. Overall, there's an overarching theme here, and all the signs point to a push to support West Bank annexation. This could be in the form of official US recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank. If not, then at least recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the settlement blocks in the West Bank, and at the very least, allowing and enabling the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the West Bank at an accelerated pace. But let's also look at Trump's actions, not only statements from his cabinet picks. On his first day in office, he rolled back the Biden administration's symbolic sanctions against violent extremist settlers and settler groups in the West Bank. The next day, after Trump took office, and for several consecutive days since, Israel has been conducting a wide-scale attack on the West Bank, even saying that Jenin is being Gazified in reference to Gaza. There's no question that the Netanyahu government and the settlers are emboldened to see Trump in office, and they're seeing Trump's presidency as a green light to wreak havoc in the West Bank. Trump's first administration, as you know, recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, defunded UNRWA, and deemed settlements not illegal, thus reversing decades-long proclaimed U.S. policy on settlements. Trump's famous deal of the century also advocated for partial annexation of the West Bank, primarily the settlement blocks. One thing to keep in mind is that Trump said explicitly that he used the Abraham Accords to prevent Netanyahu from annexing the West Bank in 2020. Whether Trump will use the West Bank annexation again to pressure Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords this time remains to be seen. But overall, the signs point to an annexationist approach to the West Bank, and we are likely to see soon some measures by the Trump administration regarding official U.S. recognition of West Bank or settlements, which is clearly a violation of international law. And this brings me to my third and last point. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Okay. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Gaza, which Trump has suggested this morning, and from the West Bank, and recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the West Bank all constitute acquiring territory by force, which is a violation of international law. They represent forced displacement, which amounts to war crimes and under the international humanitarian law, and exacerbate decades of human rights abuses and discrimination against the Palestinian population. Does Trump care? Clearly not. As an isolationist, he is notorious for pulling out of international agreement, threatening existing global norms and regulations, and for his disregard for international law. After all, he wants to take over Greenland. He's also very likely to take harsh measures against UN and international bodies, like sanctioning the ICC, cutting funding to UN agencies, and pushing to dismantle UNRWA. Under the Trump administration, Israel will get a green light to violate international law without even condemnation. Its war criminals will certainly not be held accountable, and international legal institutions will continue to be attacked. But you might ask, haven't we already seen this under the Biden administration? The only difference is probably that Biden and the Democratic Party establishment offered lip service to the two-state solution and the illegality of settlements, but without any action, much like most of Western Europe, which is not saying much given more than 30 years of mounting failures around the two-state framework. In fact, we've already seen the breakdown of international law and the global order under Biden, who presided and enabled, funded, and supported the genocide in Gaza. The US under Biden violated and undermined international law and US law in order to support and whitewash Israeli crimes and shield Israel from accountability. But as Trump is entering the White House as the 47th president, he will face new realities in the region and the world, which will make it more challenging for him to pursue his agenda. The political landscape in the Middle East has drastically changed. Over the past 15, 16 months, people across the Arab world and the world at large have been watching a live stream genocide unfold in real time and are bearing witness to the horrors in Gaza, while seeing Israel enjoy full international protection and impunity. These people are leading the global protest movement. This has further damaged Israel's international image and legitimacy and has undoubtedly made the price of normalization for Saudi Arabia significantly higher. After all, MBS is less likely now to ignore the sentiments of the Arab and Saudi public as they present external and internal threats to the kingdom, and they jeopardize his own regime survival. Also, over the last 16 months, we have witnessed the breakdown of the Western-led rules-based order. Not only are Western democracies engaging in the active justification and defense of well-documented and proven war crimes and crimes against humanity, but they are also implementing draconian anti-democratic measures against their own citizens for protesting the war. The double standards and the failures of the West to uphold international law with regard to the genocide in Gaza are prompting a restructuring of the international order, decentering the global North as arbiter of global affairs and giving rise to the global South. Countries in the global South have taken the lead to protect civilians and uphold international law. For example, we've seen states introduce resolutions at the UN. At least 11 countries recalled their ambassadors from Israel. We all know the South Africa genocide case against Israel, which is backed by several other countries. Nicaragua's case against Germany for complicity in Israeli war crimes and crimes against humanity. Several other countries have referred Israel or the situation in Palestine to the ICC. So overall, according to a mapping study, about 60% of the global South by population of countries has led or backed international legal action against Israel. Some countries in Europe, like Spain, Ireland, and Norway, are also breaking with larger powers. In this new order, Israel and the United States are more isolated than ever. Taken together, these developments indicate that Trump will face greater challenges on the world stage as he tries to chart extremist policies towards Israel. And while these are positive developments, which create cracks in the unjust global order, and chip away slowly at US hegemony and disproportionate US and Western influence on the global stage, the reality remains that the Trump administration will continue to abuse US financial, military, and diplomatic veto power to pursue his agenda. For example, Trump can easily blackmail Egypt and Jordan, defund and sanction multilateral and international agencies and legal bodies. Short of reforming this order, I don't see any major shift taking place anytime soon with regard to global dynamics. And ultimately, the deciding factor might be the extent to which regional regimes, especially wealthy Gulf states and influential states in the global South, are willing to stand up to Trump. In some cases, there might be avenues for legal action against the Trump administration, but this remains to be seen, and I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Tamara, for this very complete and rich presentation and your positive words at the end. I will now give the floor to Yousef Munayyer, who is the head of the Palestinian-Israel Program and senior fellow at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. He also served as a member of the editorial committee of the Journal of Palestine Studies. He was previously executive director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Yousef holds a PhD in international relations and comparative politics from the University of Maryland. Some of his published articles can be found in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, The Nation, Boston Globe, Foreign Policy, Journal of Palestine Studies, Middle East Policy, and others. If you want to go at the podium, you...
I'll stay seated. Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Thank you all for being here today, and to the organizers of this important conference for holding this discussion. Thank you to my fellow panelists and colleagues in the audience. I look forward to engaging with you all. We are here to talk about Donald Trump, a man who has now somehow been elected to the presidency of the United States for the second time, and what his presidency may mean for Palestine. My intervention will focus on the broader context of this moment and the unique challenges that it presents. We're witnessing a moment of profound change around the globe and in this region in particular. The past 15 months of genocide in Gaza take place in the context of these shifts. I will frame my comments along the observation of Antonio Gramsci in Understanding Interregnums, or intermediary periods between more clearly defined eras. He noted, "The old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters." So what is the old world? A hegemonic system that developed over years in the last century of liberal internationalism that posited, in a general sense, that rights trumped the naked politics of power. From the Treaty of Versailles to the collapse of empires to the death and destruction of the Second World War to the institutions and agreements forged in its wake, a series of events led to a set of rules not rulers, that were meant to keep order. The Fourth Geneva Convention was agreed to, the Convention Against Genocide was agreed to, the United Nations was formed to prevent a recurrence of world war and a clash of nuclear powers. International law, and at its core, the recognition of sovereignty of nations and its fundamental sanctity, was to put an end to the land grabs and aggression that led to one historic conflagration after the other. But it was not to last. It's hard to point to an exact moment when the decline of this old order began, but it likely accelerated in the period of American unipolarity after the Cold War. The old order sustained through decades of nuclear tensions between superpowers, or perhaps we sustained through decades of nuclear tensions between superpowers because of the old order. That possibility is enough to earn it credit. But as the Cold War came to an end, and as the United States, which has been a leading advocate in forming this order, enjoyed a period of unrivaled power, the order itself began to show its limits. The American war on Iraq, a horrific and destabilizing war that was hypocritically packaged by Washington as an endeavor for freedom, democracy, and human rights, was perhaps the most significant catalyst in this order's decline. In the years that followed, Western tolerance for strongmen against popular uprisings that sought genuine democratic change led to wars and refugees, which would further test the West's commitments to rights and values over interests. The result is a wave of right-wing, nativist, and isolationist parties gaining power throughout the Western world. Now, it's important to note here that Israel has always been in tension with this order to a certain degree. At its founding, the complete disregard for the self-determination of Palestinians was followed by the thorough ethnic cleansing of the Nakba, all while Israel adopted the UN Declaration on Human Rights and was granted full membership into the international body. The dissonance was apparent, perhaps most clearly for Palestinians, and then the decolonizing world, while the Western powers were most comfortable turning a blind eye. So maybe then it is fitting that Israel, that flimsy stone laid at the foundational stage of this post-war order, plays such a prominent role during its ultimate demise. During the Biden administration, which came to power claiming to, quote, put human rights at the center of its foreign policy, its hypocritical support for Israel was accentuated by its desire to push Russia back in Ukraine while standing with European allies. At the same time the Biden administration was speaking of international law violations in Ukraine, it was funding them in Gaza. While it welcomed ICC decisions against Putin, it condemned ICC decisions against Netanyahu. While it mobilized international support in diplomatic forums like the United Nations to isolate Russia, it isolated itself with veto after veto to keep Israel's genocidal army on the march. Skeptics of the international order had long understood it to be an instrument of power rather than an instrument to contain power. But the blatant hypocrisy of the Biden administration, which were made more insulting with every smirk from State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller and every tear from White House spokesperson John Kirby, turned the skeptics into the majority. The hegemony of the old order has shattered. Enter Donald Trump. Unlike Biden, who pretended to care for a rules-based order while funding genocide, Trump doesn't even bother with the pretending. He has skipped straight to the imperialist endeavor of annexing Greenland and the Panama Canal, tariff wars, and gutting birthright citizenship. He's removed even the most minor American sanctions on Israeli settlers precisely as they rampage most violently through the West Bank, and he threatens to sanction international courts or any who help them hold Israeli war criminals accountable. If the old order began with diplomatic conventions around protecting civilians in wartime, it has died with corporate billionaires who rushed to test their AI products with the Israeli military on the children of Gaza, standing behind the, quote, leader of the free world at his inauguration. And so what is the new world that is struggling to be born? The truth is, we don't know, and there might be some time before we find out. We see the signs of it, however, in the contentious politics of this moment. We see the signs of it on the college campuses across the West, which have erupted in protest and erected encampments to dissent from the policies that support genocide. We see it dressed in the lawyerly robes before the International Court of Justice. We see signs of it in the opinion polls. We see it on social media. We see it in the sumud of Palestinians in Gaza. And perhaps we will see more of it when Western journalists finally make their way into Gaza and report to their audiences the extent of the barbarity carried out by the Israeli military there. But the old doesn't die easy, and importantly, it fights hardest on its way out. Gramsci tells us that the power of cultural hegemony is that it is so widely accepted that it's not even questioned, it's not even noticed. It's just the way that things are. When ideas have reached a degree of hegemonic acceptance, they wield power without coercion. It's when hegemony shakes, when many begin questioning the validity of the current order, that coercion becomes increasingly necessary for maintaining a grip on power. This is precisely the stage we are at as Trump comes to power in the United States again. For several years now, we have been in a situation in the United States where public opinion on U.S. support for Israel has shifted in a much more critical direction. What was once unquestioned has come to be routinely questioned at the popular level among large swaths of the American public. Two key prior catalysts for this shift were the Israeli wars on Gaza in 2008 and 2009 and the war on Gaza in 2014. You can imagine the sort of impact 15 months of genocide will have compared to those prior wars which lasted a matter of weeks. Realizing this, the forces seeking to maintain U.S. support for Israel, chiefly the Israeli government and its allied partners in the United States, began efforts to crack down on activism and dissent against U.S. policy. In the words of Israeli government officials, when it came to responding to global activism calling out Israeli abuses, it was time to, quote, shift from defense to offense. The earliest stages of this saw the drafting and passage of anti-BDS laws in the United States, followed by intense lawfare, and then the passage of anti-Semitism definitions across various governments and institutions, regulating speech and imposing crackdowns for those that failed to comply. But as children were being slaughtered in Gaza, masses of Americans, particularly but not limited to its younger generation, took to the streets and their campus greens to protest and demand an end to the genocide. Many American Zionists were shocked by the scale, scope, and speed of this mobilization, in part because they believed that the events of October 7th would create greater sympathy for Israel as the victim. But such an outcome relied on a narrative context that Israel had itself been destroying with every bomb that they have dropped on Gaza for the past 20 years. The effort to organize a crackdown went into overdrive. The Israeli newspaper Yediot Aharonot reported in November of 2023 that Israeli government ministries working with pro-Israel American philanthropists coordinated pressure campaigns on U.S. universities. University presidents were summoned before Congress and berated and embarrassed in show trials and were later forced to resign. Lawsuits from dutiful Zionist lawfare actors sought to compel universities to crack down further, alleging discrimination. Police were called onto campuses to violently break up encampments in massively publicized instances at Columbia, UCLA, and elsewhere, even though the vast majority of protest activity was peaceful and the vast majority of violence recorded at such protests were instigated by counter-protesters. Campus is just one place where this repression is taking place. Congress has teed up all sorts of repressive legislation as well, including some that will likely pass this year, targeting the ICC, UN agencies, and NGOs who challenge the pro-Israel line. At the political level, pro-Israel interest groups have invested more money in shaping U.S. politics than ever before. AIPAC alone spent a record amount on congressional races, targeting progressive Democrats who spoke out about Israel. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent by pro-Israel donors to elect Trump, including $100 million from Miriam Adelson alone. All of this is emblematic of the top-down power plays that characterize the coercive era we are in as hegemony shakes. So students protest Israeli genocide, no problem. They demand university administrators arrest them. If the administrators don't cooperate, fine. Withdraw their donations and drag them before Congress. Okay, there's dissent in Congress, spend historic sums to unseat critics and intimidate others. Social media platforms permit dissent on Palestine, then demand that they adhere to pro-Israel speech codes and drag them before Congress or shut them down if they don't. All of this repression is happening because it's required to cling to a crumbling status quo for as long as possible. While I ultimately believe this will backfire as people will increasingly recognize it for the naked and desperate coercion that it is, it's not clear how long it may take, and pro-Israel forces remain committed to pressing on further. Now in the White House, they have an ally who speaks of ethnically cleansing millions of people as if he was rearranging his sock drawers. And so this is the time of monsters. As we move away from an era where rights and norms have value to something else, the interregnum is defined by power being the only value that matters. So what does this mean for Palestinians in this moment? While there are numerous implications, some of which will surely be covered by others on this panel, I note here two important and interrelated challenges to the Palestinian cause that are highlighted in this time of monsters. The first is the need for strategic coherence in efforts for Palestine that recognize the dangers of this moment. So much of Palestinian international engagement and advocacy has been built around the supposed values of this old world: the Geneva Conventions, United Nations resolutions, human rights, self-determination. We have spoken to the world, and particularly the West, in these terms, not only because we believe in the value of these things, but also because the West told us, however disingenuously at moments, that they did as well. But now we're increasingly hearing from the West that these things are irrelevant. Some, like Biden, say it with their hypocrisy. Others, like Trump, are openly consistent in their disregard for them. But the underlying message is clear and unified nonetheless. These things don't really matter. So why do we as Palestinians still cling to them as prominent features of liberation strategy? Perhaps they are part of a world that many of us want to live in one day. But should we not, as a people still seeking to achieve freedom in our homeland, be more concerned with that goal first than trying to build a world for 8 billion others? Palestinians have long needed a unified, coherent strategic vision which marries the strategy on the ground in Palestine with an outward-facing one that engages crucial global actors. That will only become more necessary in this period. This relates directly to the second challenge, which is the relative powerlessness of Palestinians in a time where power reigns supreme. Palestinians are a stateless people, more fragmented today than ever before, survivors of genocide perpetrated by a powerful and ruthless military backed by an even more powerful benefactor. Yet, despite all of this tremendous power imbalance, Gaza, the most besieged and oppressed of all parts of Palestine, still demonstrated the capacity of Palestine to make the entire world shake. Concentrating on the power they do have and building it will be crucial for Palestinians at this time, as well as addressing key vulnerabilities, none more important than addressing political fragmentation. Fragmentation of Palestinians and the Arab world that it is an integral part of is a key condition that enables the settler colonialism and genocide that Israel has been able to carry out. Efforts to continue to fragment Palestinians will increase further in this moment, and Palestinians must resist this at all costs and instead find pathways to renew and reinvigorate a collective leadership and strategy that can rise to the challenges of this moment. Crucially, and in closing, they must do so along the Arab people of this region who have always held Palestine in their hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Yousef. So without losing enough, again, a little bit of time, I will give now the floor. I don't know if you want to talk on the podium or you prefer to sit. Okay, so no one want to go to the podium. It's okay.
I'm the only one who does this.
Okay, Tariq, you will talk. Okay, خلاص.
Unless Tariq is going to talk about
No, he doesn't want. I think it doesn't want. So Osama, I'll give the floor to Osama Abu Irshaid. Osama is a non-resident researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Study in Washington, D.C. Osama is also the executive director of the American Justice for Palestine. for Justice in Palestine, a US lobbying organization for Palestinian rights, and is also the current chairperson of the US Council of Muslim Organization, USCMO, an umbrella organization of 8 major national Muslim organizations in the US. Osama has completed his PhD in political science at Loughborough University in the UK. He is a regular commentator on Palestine and Middle East topic, and is the author of several books in Arabic, as well as dozens of studies and articles in Arabic and English on issues relevant to the US and the Middle East. You have 20 minutes, between 15 and 20.
Okay, thank you, Leila. So usually I start by disowning my bio, but the problem I provided this one. So I have to own it. And the second point is that I'm going to ask you to adjust your interceptors now, because I'm going to switch into Arabic, and I'm going to be speaking in Arabic. So I'll save you or spare you the hassle of translation. No, just one last thing in English. Tamara, you're very smart. You know, to go first, you're very smart. I have to give you this. You knew we're going to overlap, and that's why you started first. So you left me with little options now. إذا سمحتوا لي أنا.
If you are to allow me, I will change what I wanted to talk about, because most of it was covered by Tamara already during her important presentation. And if you allow me as well, I will attempt to wear another hat here, the hat of the researcher, the academic, within limited constraints, just not to reinvent the wheel, and also the hat of the Palestinian, the political activist in the US. With the hat of the academic or the researcher here, when we talk about Donald Trump as a dangerous personality, a dangerous president, this is reality. It's not an exaggeration. He is a dangerous person, and we have proof from what we have seen in his first term between 2017 and 2021. But this should not make us forget that the United States is biased, historically and institutionally biased to Israel's favor, meaning that we were happy with the failure of Trump in the 2020 election, and with the start of Biden's term, we thought that there will be some sort of sense or reason in his administration after 4 years of tension in the US, and we found out that we were fooling ourselves. And when it comes to Israel, there's no America is back, and there's no we will restore America's respect again. This is what Biden was talking about, that he will restore America's respect and that America is back. Now Trump is using the same two mottos, America is back and America will gain its respect. However, in the Palestinian context specifically, of course we can go broader, but to talk about the Palestinian context, America is not back, because being back should have you in the first place, but they are always biased historically, religiously, and that is based on the formation of the US, the Protestant, and building the new land and the promised land and the development of the lobbies in the US. There are reasons that we can list, but this is not our topic. But what we find now is that practically the US continues in this bias, and this pattern was confirmed to us under the administration of Biden. because we're talking about an administration where the Democratic base, as per an opinion poll that was issued on the 16th of March 2023, so a few months ago before Al-Aqsa flood by Gallup, found that 49% of the Democratic base is more compassionate with or empathetic with Palestine compared to Israel. So we have a base that is more tending to support Palestinians. And we're not talking about progressive people. We're talking about Democrats in general. The same poll on the 16th of March 2023, if you would like to Google it, it's by Gallup, found that for the first time, the popularity of Israel is less than 54% at the level of the US, the public opinion in the US. So if there had been this progressive agenda or this agenda that rules by the will of people, or an agenda that goes in line with its basis, we would not have seen this obnoxious bias by Biden's administration. However, Biden was relying to his instinctive bias, and we heard the empty words that he was saying, you don't have to be Jewish to be Zionist. If Israel didn't exist, we would have made it. And he said that at the dinner table, his father told him or urged him about the importance of Israel. We heard all of that, but he went against the Democratic base. And so it's no wonder that 29% of those who voted for Biden, or 29% of those who voted for Biden in various classes on the spectrum, did not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024. And they said that the main reason was Biden's stance on the Gaza war. So they realized that there would be a crisis and that they might lose the election. And we are talking in retrospect before we realized that there would be a landslide. Usually there would be one or two states left. They were scared because it was very close in the election. And then Kamala Harris, too late, started communicating with our institutions. Of course, not personally, because she's too important to talk to us. She started communicating and asking for understanding her stance, but she didn't want to change her position or policy because there is one president only. And also the debate with Trump and all the speeches that she gave, it was like Biden did not exist, and this caused tensions between them. But when it came to Palestine, she always said that the U.S. has only one president. In everything else, no, U.S. does not have one president. She disowned his economic legacy, even though she's with him, and his legacy in immigration and in inflation, even though she works for him. And so this is a fact. The US is institutionally biased, and this requires work of another kind. You can change the public opinion, but you can't change the policy easily. And there is another study by Gallup that studied all opinion polls between 2010 2017. And they were issued in 2017, and Haaretz summarized this. And the more Americans learn about Israel, the less they like it. But it's not translated into transformations in the policy, because most of these people, for the people who vote, Palestine is not the only factor or not the only cause. And we found that in more strict laws about owning guns. So this leads me to say that this does not negate the danger of Trump as a president, because in his first administration, what we saw in Trump is that his administration turned into a channel to execute the agenda of the Zionist right wing. And this is the biggest problem. The Democrats are in line with Israel, but they put on some makeup. They cover this ugly, obnoxious face of the U.S. foreign policy. And again, I will focus on Palestine. They say that these settlements are they say illegitimate, not illegal, because illegal means they have to impose sanctions on Israel. So they use illegitimate. so that they don't impose sanctions. And so Trump changed that in his first term, and when Biden came back, he kept it the same. Not only the issue of Jerusalem. Some people could say it's hard to go back from the Jerusalem issue. What about the settlements? You did not change the fact that Trump's first administration annulled defining settlements as illegitimate. So if we go back to the first definition, then we impose sanctions, but they don't want to impose sanctions. So he goes against the Democratic base, and we see that members of the Congress demand Biden to put conditions on Israel to respect human rights in return for giving them weapons, and he did not approve of that. So this makeup was hiding the criminal policy that was behind it, and they would say when we talk about Blinken and the four imperatives, that there are four imperatives for the U.S. foreign policy, is not to reduce the space or the area of Gaza, for Gaza not to be occupied by Israel, and not to be governed by Hamas, and not to have a siege once again on Gaza. But practically, what did Biden's administration do? Nothing. They supported Israel to continue its policy. Trump does not have this makeup. He comes and gives you his true face, and he comes and he says Gaza will be nice like Monaco, and even nicer than Monaco because they have beaches and the sun. So when he talks about Monaco, this entails forced displacement of people. So when he calls the Jordanian king and calling Sisi, he is preparing for what he is calling Monaco. And his son-in-law Kushner, when he talked about the beautiful beaches and compared them to Singapore, because he deems everything as real estate property. So he gives you this ugly face that Biden never stopped in the first place, but Biden would say we don't want to reduce the area of Gaza, but we enable Israel to continue. Now the ugly face comes with some leverage as well. This leverage, we found that Trump was able to impose ceasefire even though Biden was not able to do that, not because Biden did not have the ability. He did not want to, regardless, maybe he was scared about the votes or the donations. So Trump used this leverage and he mocked Biden, and it is his right to mock Biden. Of course, there were motivations for Netanyahu, and these motivations, again, will be a second channel. And a second channel to pass this agenda, reduce the area of Gaza, displace people from the West Bank and the Gaza district, so the Gaza Strip. So going back to what happened in Trump's first administration, Peace for Prosperity, it was talking about annexing 60% of the West Bank, including the Jordan Valley, and annexing Palestinians in the 1948 territories, Ara, Qira, Kafr Tiba, Al-Faham, I do not remember all the cities and the villages that were mentioned, to become part of the Palestinian state. So Jordan must consent to have a federalism or confederalism, and the pressure that was being enforced on Jordan. And now it is being enforced, but under the veil of Gaza or under the pretext of Gaza. And now he lifted the sanctions against the settlers, which the sanctions happened during the Biden administration. And now they will talk about the emptying of Palestine, or a considerable part of the West Bank and Gaza. Why? Because Israel is so tiny. This is what Trump said in August. Israel is tiny and we need to find ways to expand Israel as a state. So we shouldn't underestimate that, because the US is biased and Biden showed us an ugly face, and if Biden had succeeded, we would have had allies in the Democratic Party, but not in the Republican Party. And we named Miriam Edelson when she donated 100 million. We remember that her husband gave tens of millions of dollars to recognize Jerusalem as the formally as the capital of Israel, and he moved the embassy there. So we do not underestimate that, because this is related to other affairs. Trump does not like the weak. He is a bully. He is a thug, and he likes strong people. So his anger is against black people. His anger is against Latinos, against Muslims, anger against Denmark right now and Canada, because he wants to extort them. He thinks he has the upper hand. He worked in real estate development, and they work with the mob, the mafia in America. And so he is a man of the mob. That is his way of thinking, and that reflects on the foreign policy. Palestinians are poor, weak people. They don't have any support. Arabs will negotiate that about them. And so pressuring them is easier than pressuring the Israelis, because there are contractual relations with the Israelis for Trump. And so when we say in 2017, when Trump met with Abu Mazen in Bethlehem, he scolded him in a disrespectful way, even though the advisors to Trump told him that the video that Netanyahu gave to you was manipulated. And so Abu Mazen was instigating violence and the hate against Jews. And so they warned him that this was manipulated, but he refused to listen to them. And he said, "You tricked me," and he scolded him and yelled at him, even though he knew it was manipulated. He considered Abu Mazen weak, and when he clashed with Netanyahu, there was a question about who is the boss, because he is a narcissist. So now I will wear the hat of the political activist, and Yousef talked about this. What happened in the US during the Israeli aggression against Gaza was unprecedented. Palestine turned into an electoral cause. This is an accomplishment that we cannot underestimate or belittle, no matter how pessimistic we are. And I will be honest with you. We have 7 lawsuits against our organization, 2 lawsuits against me. So we have over 10 lawsuits against us from Zionist organizations, and we are on the observation lists. And there are students whose scholarships were suspended. Some people were shot, and so once I called the police that I was threatened with the murder, and they didn't come because the governor in Virginia was telling us that I want to verify that you do not support terrorism, and they talked about withdrawing the non-for-profit killer bill from organizations that are originally exempted with an executive singular decision from the Secretary of Finance under the pretext of suspicion of supporting terrorism. Of course, it's supposedly the defendant is innocent until proven guilty, but now they are giving us the responsibility of proving our innocence. And even when we successfully prove that, when everyone hears about these accusations, everyone stays away from us. So we know about this game. Now these laws, why are they in place? They are in place because they have reached a situation where they are incapable of stopping this movement, this motion supporting Palestine, even though they suspended students and expelled some students, and some students are now in courts Jewish Jewish Voices for Peace and other organizations are accused of terrorism. You know, the older women who wear pink and go in protests. Madea Benjamin is accused of knowing about the October 7th and coordinating with Hamas. Of course, I am accused with her in the same lawsuit. And I was laughing. I told her, did you know and you didn't tell me? So we are talking about a state of weakness in the U.S., a charade, because this action surprised them. And they were relying on one thing, that this mobilization that happened in the U.S., if they hadn't prepared for it before the 7th of October, it wouldn't have come. But the reality is that there is a new momentum and transformation in the U.S. To conclude, this brings me back to an issue. We are facing huge challenges, existential challenges in the U.S. I'm always wondering, will I be arrested? Will we be arrested or what? Because everything is open in the U.S. I travel every week. I walk around from a university to another, and students are still supporting the cause. And we see all these communities supporting this action for Palestine, because the post 7th of October is another world for them. So what frustrates me is that the Arab reality is not in line spiritually with the reality in the US, and that is the main problem. When we look at what happened in Jenin and how we in Palestine cannot develop a national discourse, not with reference, with the political reference for us, because it is not possible to ask the students to have one reference when you do not have one singular reference. And Arab countries, if we are calling Trump regime or Trump administration a conduit, other Arab regimes consider themselves the spark of the Middle East, and they believe that they have a functional role that they should play at the expense of Palestinians. The challenge is not just for Palestine. There is also Syria, and there's occupation and manipulation and pressure on Egypt and Jordan to accept ethnic cleansing at the expense of their dignity, reputation, and national security, and asking other parties to construct the Gaza Strip to become another Monaco. You will realize that this is a challenge for all Arabs, not only Palestinians, and this spirituality and the building of this project and this block. If it doesn't happen, we will not succeed. Even the US depth needs to be connected to its external and foreign depth that works for the Palestinian rights. Thank you.
شكرا لك أسامة على هذا العرض الثري وإعطائنا كل
actually in the US right now in terms of repression and censorship. Thank you. Last but not least, we'll listen now to Tariq Dana. Tariq is an associate professor and head of conflict management and humanitarian action program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. His area of studies includes interdisciplinary approach encompassing critical political economy, colonial and settler colonial studies, national liberation movement, foreign intervention and state building, as well as economic development, with a particular focus on Palestine. He served as a policy advisor for Shabaka, a research associate in security in context, and an associate editor for the Middle East Critique Journal. His work has been published in various peer-reviewed academic journals, and he has contributed to many edited books. You have the floor for 20 minutes maximum, then we can leave the floor to the...
شكرا ليلى. مساء الخير جميعا. ستركز مداخلتي على حالة اتفاق
My intervention on the Abraham Accords, especially in the post-7th of October period, and I will give a brief introduction about these agreements and the American perspective. What do these agreements mean so far as reconstructing the United States? And I can link that to Yousef's presentation And at the end, I'll give some sort of an appraisal or assessment of these agreements. These agreements formed a pivotal turning point in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict and the Arab-Israeli relations in particular during the peace agreements like the Wadi Araba and Camp David and others, and the cold peace situation, which was confined to the elites on both sides. This agreement came to chart a new path. These agreements seek to include Israel as a partner integrated in the region. In other words, not to deal with Israel as an outside power, and this requires a comprehensive network of relations politically, security-wise, economically, and even cultural normalization. And this was the first organized attempt to bypass the pivotal role the Palestinian cause plays in the Arab conscience and to create an EU equation placing Israel at the heart of this consciousness. And in doing so, this was an attempt to reproduce the old and new vision of turning the Palestinian question into a side marginal issue which can be bypassed easily. The 2002 Arab Initiative was the last attempt to solve this problem. Full recognition of Israel in return for Israel's withdrawal from the 1967 territories and the establishment of a Palestinian state. So that included, at a minimum, the linkage between normalization and respecting the rights of the Palestinian people. And with the Abraham Accords, the era of Arab unanimity on the centrality of the Palestinian cause has ended, and a new era is supposedly starting. And if there is ever to be negotiations, then the Palestinian negotiator would have lost the last card he had in his hand, and that is the unified position of Arab countries. So in this, what this means is the Israelis will get the full benefit of this process without giving anything in return. Secondly, part of the risks that this kind of normalization establishes a psychological change in the Arab consciousness. In the past, the relationship between Arabs and Israelis was part and parcel of a balance of power which were presented as a reality. And now, if the normalization is presented as peace with Israel means peace, stability, prosperity, and which was happened in the case of Jordan and Palestine. Now, normalization is presented as something which is not necessarily so. Number three, it redefines the very nature of this conflict. Instead of Israel being the main reason for instability through its expansionist policies, now Iran is represented as this kind of a threat, and this will marginalize the Palestinian cause and establishes a new rationale that Israel will be a main partner to face up to other challenges or other enemies. And in continuation of what Yousef has talked about, I think this project came at a very sensitive historical moment when the international world order was witnessing for the first time a real challenge to the American hegemonic position, whether from China or Russia or other blocs. I think this has led Washington to reassess its strategy in the world and in the Middle East in particular, because this area has depleted a lot of American resources and efforts. So Washington is banking on this new normalization and new regional alliance between some Arabs and Israelis will create continuity of American presence and also minimize its military and other expenditure and depletion of its resources. Article number 7 is the most striking, and which stipulates that the parties are ready to join the United States to expand relations, whether at the political, economic, diplomatic, and other relations, to enhance peace in the region. This article reveals the essence of these agreements as a comprehensive strategy towards the Middle East. It goes well beyond normalization. It's aimed at starting a complete regional system under the leadership of the United States, which can influence all aspects of life. And why do these agreements occupy such a strategic importance in American foreign policy? I think this is due to the following thing. The Abraham Agreement now is considered the main reference frame for all attempts at normalization. Now you see the Congress in March 2022 has passed legislation which is very important. First, it obliges the State Department to come up with a comprehensive strategy to expand the aspects of normalization between Arab countries and Israel, taking into account the Abraham Accords as a reference. So this means any future agreements will have to take into account the Abraham Accord. Secondly, and this is not publicly announced, that the history of the conflict between Arabs and the Israelis should be redefined and reintroduced through the lens of the Abraham Accords. And when we notice the Abraham Institute for Peace and others and the documents they produce, when they talk about the actors, the four main countries which signed the Morocco, Sudan, Emirates, and Bahrain, in addition to Egypt and Jordan. So we will see that there's an attempt by Jordan and Egypt to enter the network. So what happened in the Abraham Accords? What happened to it because of the 7th of October? I will not repeat what Leila has said. The 7th of October attack was an attempt to face up to the challenge of the Accords, the Abraham Accords, normalization, and to re-establish the Palestinian cause on the table in the Middle East. Of course, the 7th of October events had frozen, even temporarily, the process of normalization, which looked inevitable, and Saudi Arabia, instead of joining this agreement publicly with Israel, found itself having to distance itself a little bit even if this was a political maneuver, and it may well be so, but these countries began to understand that any regional arrangements should take into account solving the Palestinian cause on a just basis, otherwise they will suffer. So by and large, the events of the 7th of October have turned the Arab region into a field to experiment on all these perspectives. On the one hand, the events show that the very basics of these agreements were solid, but at the execution level, there were some weakness. First of all, the political will. We saw that the Arab countries ignored the genocide on the people of Gaza and ignored the public opinion in their countries. And unlike the past, the countries which normalized used to resort to some symbolic measures. Now we didn't see any freezing, any temporary suspension of relations, closing embassies, etc. And this leads to a question that has the discourse of normalization been changed from a tactic to a strategic consideration? I think the UAE foreign minister said relations with Israel is a long-term strategic decision. And this makes it apparent that no matter what happens in Palestine, they will totally disregard the Palestinian question or cause. The most important and obvious aspect is the economic aspect, and statistics reveal that in 2023, the size of the trade between these countries and Israel exceeded 4 billion. And it's a 16% increase on the previous year at a time when Israel's trade with the rest of the world has suffered a retreat and a decrease of some 14%. And of course, this do not include water and gas or military products, which is worth 3 billion, and also in technology and cyber security, so therefore the real size of the trade between these Arab countries and Israel is probably in the region of 10 billion. The other indication, the change of the strategic map of the region, like the pathway to Europe from India to link the UAE with Israel through Saudi Arabia and Jordan by a railway system. And this, of course, is an attempt to re-engineer the region to make Israel the main logistical hub in the exchange between East and West. What happened in 11th of September, there was a change when the Houthi attacks on international shipping showed that this trade line between the UAE and Israel came into prominence as an alternative route. I think this was just a trial of that. The vision behind the Abraham Accords were presented in Negev Summit 2022 and the Jeddah Summit, and the United States including it in the National Defense Authorization Act, which emphasized the necessity to start some defensive networks like missile shields and, of course, maintaining Israel's upper hand. 2023, Israel was moved from the European Command to Central Command, which is responsible for military operations in the Arab region, North Africa, and as parts of Asia. And the reason for this was to come up with an operational vision for the Abraham Accords. This means Israel now will share in many joint activities which will allow Israel to be integrated into the regional security system led by the US. After the 7th of October, I think the confrontation with Iran showed that the region, for the first time, saw military operations, including Israel, the US, and Arab countries, to defend Israel against Iranian missile attacks. And also, the very basic tenets of the Abraham Accords were based on certain ideas, mainly to bypass the Palestinian cause. The 7th of October showed that this kind of seismic change and how the Palestinian cause was back to the attention of and the consciousness and awareness of the Arab people. The Israeli narrative was criticized. There were wide campaigns of sympathy with the Palestinian people. And the second level is important enough to be dealt with, and it shows that it's impossible to build a system based on normalization which can be stable without taking into account the Palestinian cause. The third idea is the reformation of the consciousness amongst the Arab people. The normalizing regimes were thinking that they can do what they want without or in complete disregard of the public opinion, and their ability as regimes to impose their positions and going beyond what the public opinion was. But the 7th of October showed that there has been large campaigns of sympathy with the Palestinian cause, even in the countries which are normalizing with Israel. And this reveals the depth of this feeling. And this also reveals that there is a division between the official lines, the government lines, and the popular lines of public opinion. And we see also that some opinion polls reveal that the Arab Center's opinion poll was unimportant. It shows that 89% of the respondents objected to their countries recognizing Israel. The vast majority said that 92% almost said that the Palestinian cause is the last supposition was Israel guaranteeing Israel's military superiority and technological superiority. There is no doubt about that, but even this superiority has its limits. The success of the Al-Aqsa flood and the failure of Israel to fulfill its strategic objectives in the Gaza Strip, and also the myth of the Israeli army, which is invincible, which was a reason for attracting Arab countries to normalize Israel, had collapse also, and this kind of failure has placed the Arab countries in a dilemma, because some of these Arab countries have invested billions in Israeli technology. Now they are asking, how can we rely on a strategic security partner which cannot even protect itself?
So we still have half an hour to continue this conversation. So before giving the floor to the public, I might maybe ask two questions to all of you, and everyone can choose which one to answer. The first question is related again to the ceasefire agreement. We've talked a lot on the fact that Trump is the one who wanted so much to reach this deal before assuming office, but we didn't ask ourselves if actually it's not Netanyahu who also badly wanted this to conclude this deal, mainly because the Israeli army actually failed to implement its goal in the Gaza Strip. And so my question is, to what extent do you think Netanyahu used Trump's pressure as a way out to sign the agreement without appearing to make any concession to Hamas? My other question is related to the Trump-Israeli ideological alliance. Yousef talked a little bit about how the Biden administration, how Biden pretended to care about human rights and those liberal values. And we know also that Israel has always relied on Western values to hide its colonial lens, presenting itself as an outpost of democracy in the region, and also as the defender of minority rights, including the LGBT rights. So how do you think Israel will navigate now, given the fact that Trump precisely embodies this force, fascism, and this opposition to minority, precisely? Do you think Israel has definitely let aside its concern about its image? If so, do you think it tells something about the future policy in the region? Like, do you think it's inaugurate something like a worst-case scenario in the region? And could we also imagine maybe that a future opposition in the US, a future opposition to Trump, might ultimately damage Israel and harm Israel? Thank you. Who first? Tamara?
I can briefly comment on the first question, and I'll be interested in hearing also what other people think. Netanyahu may have wanted a way out, and without upsetting his far-right coalition, but also it was very risky for Netanyahu. I'm not an expert on internal Israeli politics, but Netanyahu is not popular at all, and he's facing legal cases, and so if he were to lose his coalition and be out of government, he will be in trouble. So I'm not sure that that was the case, but maybe Yousef can comment on this as well.
Yeah, I thank you for the question, Leila. I did actually want to respond to this question around the ceasefire because I didn't get a chance to talk about that in my comments. And I think I might differ a little bit from some of the other comments that were made around this. I don't think Trump pressured Netanyahu into making this deal at all. I don't think that's how it went down. I think the Israelis understood from the moment that they became aware of what exactly took place after October 7th, and the first several days after October 7th, the number of Israeli captives, the situation on the ground in Gaza, that the only way that they were going to get Israeli captives back was through an agreement. This was not going to be something that was resolved militarily. At the same time, politically, it was unacceptable for the Israelis to make any sort of agreement before they had shed so much blood that they could come away claiming that they have done the damage, they have created a victory that justifies the kind of concessions that they're going to have to make in an agreement that was evident from the beginning. What dictated this agreement was the reality on the ground. After 15 months of total destruction in Gaza, the Israeli military acknowledged many months ago that there was nothing left for them to achieve militarily on the ground. So one of the few things that the Israelis were able to control is when they were going to come to this agreement from their side. Obviously, from the Palestinian side, there's been a willingness to make this exchange deal from the first days after October 7th. But the Israelis, and particularly Netanyahu, was a very good student of American politics, perhaps a better student of American politics than Israeli politics, understood that this was an election year, understood precisely what this war meant for the re-election chances of the Democrats, and understood that Trump was waiting in the wings, that Trump was going to be next. And you know, for those of us who remember a previous American president named Reagan, who came in on Inauguration Day with the magical release of hostages, American hostages then from Iran, that were released right at the moment of his inauguration. The optics of this all was a gift that Netanyahu was able to deliver to Trump that really nobody else could. And there's going to be a reward for that. There's going to be a reward for that. The question is, what is it? Is it going to be the West Bank? Is it going to be the continuation of war in Gaza? Is it going to be war on Iran? Is it going to be all of the above? We don't know. But I'm very skeptical of the idea that Netanyahu, that Trump pressured Netanyahu into this. No, it was known for a long time that this deal was going to be made, and that it was going to be made in a way that was most politically convenient for Netanyahu and for Trump. And that meant doing it right at the time of the inauguration.
Do you mind if I
No,
comment?
of course. Please.
I want to strike a middle ground here. I agree there was an internal pressure on Netanyahu. The military and security apparatuses were pressuring Netanyahu that without objectives, clear objectives, we cannot continue this war, and we've achieved our objectives. And it was very obvious that the elimination of Hamas is an impossible scenario from the beginning, and this was acknowledged even by the Israeli military. But Netanyahu needed a ladder to climb down, and Trump was that ladder. Biden couldn't provide it, because Biden wasn't respected by Netanyahu and wasn't respected by his far-right coalition. So I still think there is the Trump factor is present. We cannot just negate it. It is present, but there was this marriage of expediency between the two. And to some point, I think Netanyahu used Trump as a counterbalance to the pressure that he's under from Smotrich and Ben Gvir. So I'm not going to negate this factor. I think it is present, and Netanyahu needed a way out. Israel needed a way out, but at the same time, they needed a justification. Trump, that was just that justification. In addition, and this is the last point I want to make, Trump is not beholden to Netanyahu as Biden is beholden to Netanyahu. And his base is fully supportive of him. I don't think the Zionist lobby can go after Trump the way they go after Biden or after Democrats, because Democrats are accused of being now a safe haven for anti-Semitism. It is something that you can't accuse Republicans of, and you cannot accuse Trump of merely that the Republican Party had now developed into a cult as opposed to a political party. So Trump is not as receptive to the pressure, to the Israeli pressure, as Biden. So I think the factor is there, but yes, it coincided with the internal pressure that was building within Israel on Netanyahu and his government. Yeah.
Thank you, Osama. You have something to add, maybe, Tariq, or maybe you want to answer the other question?
ما عندي مداخلة بالنسبة
أوكي.
الآن يعني ممكن
نفتح المجال. طيب. Yes. No, yes, but no. We need the microphone.
شكرا كتير. هاي كانت ندوة كتير مهمة زي
It's a very important symposium, and this whole forum was important. But we know that we are approaching a very dangerous phase for us as Palestinians, because competitiveness between Trump and Netanyahu, which we were talking about yesterday, who's the boss, will be at the expense of Palestinians, and the price will be paid by Palestinians wherever they are around the world. The competitiveness, unfortunately, will be bad, and its implications will be seen soon. My question is basically for Osama, because this is a lethal combination, devilish and evil combination. But what are we waiting as Palestinians to unify ourselves? So what do we need more than that? For factions to have political action. We keep saying red line, and the president is the red line. But what should happen more for him to move as a real leader of the Palestinian people? Is it possible that until now we still don't have reconciliation between the Palestinian factions? I feel like talking about genocide is insufficient for explaining what we went through. And this is a huge challenge. And perhaps this is our problem, that we need organization. Your question about the U.S. Jews working, lobbying in the U.S. This is the way we need to be working. We should have such action. It could be hard, but we need to overcome that. لدينا 4 أسئلة هناك. Thank you for all of the speakers. I have a question, or in addition to what Dr. Tariq said about normalization. In most of our literature, when we talk about normalization, we talk about its danger on the Palestinian cause. We never talk about its dangers on the Arab states. I believe this requires further study in 2 themes. First, the nature of relationship that Israel and the U.S. want between the normalizing country and Israel, and if we notice or follow up on the U.S. behavior and their pressure with the countries that have all the peace treaties with Israel, they pressure these countries to rely on Israel, especially in their strategic commodities such as gas, oil, electricity, and water. So if you make them dependent economically on Israel, you take away their agency in the world. And the other thing is related to the nature of the country. What are the nature of countries normalizing with Israel, to find out what they want? What do Israel and US want for us, for our states to be? In my opinion, they want us to fulfill these conditions. First, to be a tyrannic or totalitarian state. If we look at the opinion polls by the Arab Center, most of the Arabs reject normalization with Israel. If you want to normalize with Israel, you will not have any freedom of expression. And also severing the cultural and religious ties with our heritage. If you are a country that still believes in pan-Arab movements and the Islamic identity, they cannot normalize, and it should be also an extortable country, so one that we can extort it. So to make countries normalize with Israel, you need to create another type of countries that will harm not only these states, but the region as a whole. So what I'm trying to say here, Dr. Tariq, let us expand these studies to include the impact of normalization on these states and the new form of the Middle East after the normalization. Thank you for all the speakers. The academic structure of the papers is really good and the speakers are very well spoken. But since yesterday until today, we have so much diagnosis. Everything that was presented today was diagnosis, and it says built well. So its results are existent in the collective awareness with people in the streets. They know that there is a threat of displacement, there is an existential war against the Palestinian people. We haven't heard since yesterday and until today any serious proposals about strategic visions. What is the strategic visions? What are its elements? We did not address any solutions. We talk about Gramsci approach, how we build blocks in the Palestinian reality. When this dangerous visitor goes into the White House for the second time and we're talking, we're reanalyzing as if we don't know him. One of the important figures in my country talked to me about some things, and he said some offers are not there to be rejected, and the offer given by Trump are not to be rejected. The answer should exactly be to whom these offers are being given. Are we qualified to have a Gramscian block and to offer solutions? I am asking if there are some concepts of solutions working in the US, working in the Arab world, Arab regimes, and in the occupied homeland. Dr. Osama, I would like to ask you to what extent what Netanyahu is doing, supported by Trump, will lead into regional chaos. Is there a threat of the Israeli danger being run amok if Israel crosses the lines in Syria and also cause forced displacement, which might threaten the peace treaties such as Camp David and normalization? So we cannot guarantee the Arab people to be silent forever. The Arab people are not dead inside. To what extent does Trump have a vision? If Biden, the son of institutions for 50 years, does not have a vision, and even the US institutions do not have a vision, and Biden could not force Netanyahu. So if a chaotic person comes, can this chaotic person come and enforce a vision that they don't have upon Netanyahu? The last thing is, how much can we have discrepancy between the US and the Israeli relations, between the personalities of Trump and Netanyahu? And perhaps Netanyahu can favor his relationship to Smotrich rather than Trump, because Netanyahu, if he loses this alliance, might go to prison. سؤال أخير، ومن ثم سوف نمنح المتحدثين الفرصة للإجابة بشكل سريع.
I know.
Thank you so much. So my question is very simply, if President Mahmoud Abbas were to pass away in the next 4 years, what role do you...
بعد الشر نضيله. Okay.
Very simply, what role do you expect the Trump admin to play in the selection of his successor? So maybe Dr. Tamara, you can answer that.
Okay. آخر سؤال, and then we'll leave the floor to our speaker, and then it's going to be the last one because I guess we only have 10 minutes left. Thank you. Make it short, please.
Very short.
First question, Dr. Tariq, for the two streams, the popular and the official. I was in the war in Gaza for 40 days and we left and we saw many Arab countries inside and outside. And the role of the Arab people from the Gaza Strip and its relationship with that, please highlight that. Also, the Israeli lobby and the issue of the US. Ahmed Ghanem talked about the visions and strategies. Do you expect to have a Palestinian lobby or a global lobby in the face of this Israeli lobby dominating many administrative centers? Also, Tamara, regarding the craziness or insanity of Trump, how do we face the insanity of Trump when we have existential threats? And Mr. Yousef said, the war stopped without the decision of Trump. My sister there says the war did not end. We went into more wars, and this Israeli barbaric war can come back at any moment, and nobody can stop it. هل تريد أن تجيب أولا؟
طارق, no, you don't have anything to say. Okay, طارق.
اوكي انا بدي اجاوب على سؤالك. مداخلتك المهمة جدا فعلا، يعني أنا مداخلتك مهمة جدا. أنا يعني في النهاية كان تركيزي على فلسطين لسبب إنه الموضوع عن فلسطين، بس بشكل عام أنا ماخذ بعين الاعتبار هالقضية.
I take into consideration the things you talked about. I am working on a research paper about the regional transformations, especially normalization, specifically what is happening in the Arab world and the Arab countries. For example, I argue, as I mentioned in my paper, that the Abraham Accords are U.S. design that relies on the offshore balancing with instead of investing in the one region. I create regional alliances. And this is what is happening. What is happening, in my opinion, there is incremental or a hierarchy. The US is dominating, mainly dominating the others. And it is giving up some forms of domination for some forces. In this case, Israel, the privileged client state. It's a client state, same as Arab countries. But the difference is that they're privileged. They have certain privileges with the US, and so the US will delegate them to do many tasks that they were in charge of in the past. And the most important indicator of that is keeping Israel superior in terms of technology and military aspects, and other Arab countries. We have rich countries in the Gulf and poor countries like Sudan, and here we will create new dependencies. For example, Jordan and Egypt, there is a structural dependency politically when we talk about water, when we talk about gas. An Israeli expert was asked about the geography of power during the Gaza war. The report was about where are the Arabs from the Gaza war, and he said if Egypt and Jordan try to criticize Israel in an exaggerated matter, we will cut the power from Amman and Cairo. It's simple as that. So the nature of this dependency with a country like the UAE. The UAE is rentiering, has a rentiering economy, and it might also be dependent. And this means that we will have a comprehensive Israeli domination. You know that by the end of the day, technology can make you dominate the entire world. And so, what is coming is dangerous for the Arab world. And you talked about the religious aspect and the heritage, but it is obvious for me that there is an attempt to reproduce what we call the Islamo-Zionism. a new interpretation of religious texts, scripts, to create new stories, saying, for example, that Al-Aqsa does not exist in Jerusalem, to invent religious scripts, and that the Palestinian resistance is against Jews, and Jews are just another Abrahamic religion. And so this is a dangerous attempt to create a new form of Zionism. Of course, I don't want to take any longer to give my colleagues a chance to talk. Tamara, أسامة، بشكل مختصر الكثير من الأسئلة مرتبطة
They deal with this larger power imbalance that we're talking about, whether Israel or the US. And we have started seeing cracks in this global system. It's not enough, and it will take time. But I think this is the beginning of maybe some change, and I wish I had solutions. But I think the cracks are there, and they're starting to happen. Just one comment on the Abraham Accords and the normalization agreements. Yes, the US bribed countries into signing the Abraham Accords with different things. It's very transactional based on what each country wanted from the United States. And they are essentially authoritarian defense alliances. And we've already seen those countries using Israeli technology, repressive spyware, surveillance technologies, and defense against their own populations to suppress dissent and silence any critics inside the countries. On the question about Abbas passing away, I mean, we've heard that Abbas named his successor a few months ago, and I think it turned out to be as a request from the Saudis in exchange for some funds. I don't know if that information is confirmed or not, but I don't think this global system will allow the Palestinian Authority to fall at this time.
Thank you, Tamara. Osama, and don't forget to answer Mahmoud Abbas.
لا أنا I'm gonna pass on this one. محمود عباس الأعمار بيد الله يعني إيش شو بدي أسوي له يمكن أنا أموت وهو لسه عايش. نعم طيب سريعا الأخت اللي سألت على ماذا نحتاج كيف
lady who asked what do we need as Palestinians. Mr. Ahmad, Mr. Ma'in, Mr. Hani are here. Dr. Hiba as well, Dr. Reem. There are attempts to recover or restore the national Palestinian decision. I cannot say for sure what we will achieve. However, there are attempts. It's not like there aren't any attempts. And this leads me to what Mr. Ahmad said about diagnosis. Please don't be upset with me. Diagnosis in the Arab reality. There is a diagnosis on the Palestinian level. At the US level, I don't have any diagnosis. We are in battle. We are in a battle in terms of lobbying, advocacy, awareness, activism, mobilization. What happened in the US did not happen in the Arab states, and the price that was paid was hefty, even by the US criteria. What happened in Gaza was a genocide, but the attempt to eradicate Palestinian voices, what happened in the US as a result to this transformation, they were not surprised by it, but they were surprised by its size and volume. And so this is not just about diagnosis, this is about actions. We are all rolling up our sleeves and working, and we are talking about the targeting. When I Google my name, I get scared of myself. I think I will bomb myself or something. So this is an attempt to abort a movement or mobilization. But what happens here is the Islamo-Zionism that Tariq talked about, and the funding of developing the moderate Muslim networking, and the anti-Semitic text in the Quran, and ADL is defining the anti-Semitism and the cases that what they had when someone is walking wearing the keffiyah, they consider it Semitic. And the Palestinian authority is trying to abort the action also. So we need to be realistic. The problem that we have is at the level of the general bloc of Palestine. The Arab media is not concerned with actions in the US. They want a white man or woman to talk. They don't want to listen to people who are in the arenas. They want you to be a political analyst. They want you to be a political analyst, and they don't want you to talk more than that. So they don't understand what intersectionality is. They believe that it means that there is a Christian, white, Jewish dimension to things, but the real strength is 6 to 8 million Muslims who are US citizens as well, and who represent the strength. I travel every week. I am involved in work with communities and with universities. Indiana University issued a report of $2.8 billion to $4.2 billion were donations, zakah and sadaqah, by these students. And the mosques are equipped with gyms and basketball courts, and they are really prestigious. It's very nice. They asked to sit there. Islam in the US is an identity. It's not just a religion. Islam has become an issue of identity. It's the same as for Jews, Muslims, even if they're not religious, Islam is an identity for them. So you sit with the fathers and the daughters and the son. You see the diversity sitting down. The daughters and sons talk about the uncles, the ammo. And they talk about their parents not proving them participating in the protests and the embankments at the campuses. So these $2.4 billion in donations, why don't we invest instead of donating to mosques? Some people donate even $1 million to mosques. Give them 700,000 and another 300,000 to charity work. So give some of that to the political work in the US. We are sending 300 million to Gaza, and the US with one missile will take away all of that. But we can build the political bloc in the US, where we will have 100,000 Miriam Adelson, but they don't want to invest in politics. They want to look like the good people. There's a tornado and I want to donate for that. Okay, donate for that, but also think about your cause. So there is a real debate about that in the US, and we are working on that. So I'm not just talking about diagnosis. Diagnosis is important, but it's not everything. The US can restrain Israel when they want, and when they don't want to do that, they won't.
أعتقد أن الوقت قد حان.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to the four speakers for your very nice and interesting presentation, and have a nice